It's time for Leland Searles talking about cleaning up Iowa's watersheds and streams. Leland is a consulting ecologist and business owner. He specializes in stream hydrology and restoration, native plant identification and inventories, and ecosystem assessment and restoration. Lee's interests have taken him into the possibilities for rewilding and wildness in the Midwest to revitalize natural processes that have been diminished by human activities. He has a PhD in sociocultural anthropology from the University of Minnesota in 2001 and a master's degree from the Iowa State University from 1993. Lee enjoys time outdoors, birding, observing life forms, and trying to piece together the relationships that sustain life. So I give you Leland Searles, who's not from Fairfield, but spends a lot of time here, and we still think of him as a community asset. So, Leland.
Well, thank you, and it's good to be here again. I'm getting to know Jefferson County and the Fairfield area more and more, and I'm impressed with a lot of the efforts here to develop local foods and take care of the land better. So one of the things, I guess I'm going to come at this in a different way. You've heard a lot about food and food production systems today, and I'm going to talk as an ecologist. So I'm coming at many of the same issues from a little different direction. The slide shows behind all of the words and everything, the Crow Creek watershed here. And Crow Creek runs from north of town, down through town, and then empties into Troy Creek, doesn't it? Isn't that right? Yes. And then runs past Lamson Woods and onto Cedar Creek. And Crow Creek is a fairly typical stream in a lot of ways, that it has agricultural land, it has commercial land, and then urban land. So when I look at it as a person who does stream hydrology and stream restoration, I think there's a lot of potential here for change, positive change, that can take care of problems like flash flooding, problems of lack of aquatic biodiversity, problems in water control in general. So what I'm going to talk about today really is a 2-semester college course in 20 minutes, so get ready. I want to start with talking about some newer ways of thinking that have emerged, and they include things like regenerative agriculture and the concept of resilience and sustainability. But I'd like to just throw out some other vocabulary for you to think about. Synergy, imbrication, complexity, mutualism, symbiosis, integrity, change, interdependence, and reciprocity. I'll touch on 2 of those. Symbiosis. When I was in graduate school in the 1990s through 2001, the last stint of grad school, I was a teaching assistant for a biological anthropology course. That was also a learning experience for me, to be immersed in things like human evolution and the genetics of humanity and everything else that went along with that. At the time, in the 1990s, there were a few examples of symbiotic relationships where one organism supported another organism and vice versa. In the time 20 to 25 years later, we realized that the entire world is symbiotic. Independence is a rarity in the natural world. The other one is the concept of reciprocity. And here's where, just driving down here today, walking out the front door of my house, getting in the car, a little more than a 2-hour drive through rural Iowa, it's hard not to see what has happened to our landscape. It's trashed. It's trashed. And then the question becomes, What are we going to do as partners with that natural world that we have damaged so badly? What are we going to do to give back part of what we have taken? We've taken a lot, and I don't think we can put it all back the way it was. I think that's impossible. But we can put something back and create a future for our own life form and all the other life forms around us. So those two words, symbiosis and reciprocity, I think, are key to understanding this newer way of thinking about who we are as a species and as individuals and as communities and every other grouping of human beings. So we've already heard a lot today about related ideas, human relations and food utilities, human-soil interactions, humans, livestock, soil and climate, and watersheds, water quality, and human land uses, which you're about to hear about. So I put new in scare quotes because so much of this thinking already existed. It already existed among the world's people. What Europe has managed to do through the period of colonial domination, and then after World War II, the emergence of the global marketplace, what we have managed to do is to destroy a lot of that knowledge that we need, or at the very least, force it underground. So now a lot of the world's indigenous people who have these understandings don't want to cooperate with we white people for good reason. And I can really comprehend why. Because we've been the destroyers. We've been the wrong Hindu god. We should have been the other one, the creator. A quote from Gary Snyder, the American poet and writer. The watershed is the first and last nation whose boundaries, though subtle and shifting, are unarguable. I'll let you ponder that while I go on to say something about how humans divide land into chunks. One of the natural ways, from our perspective, is to use landforms to divide up land and say, okay, you guys over in that community or that nation, we'll use a river to divide and make a boundary. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is to say, okay, we're going to go to war against you, and as far as we can advance, that's where we put the boundary. A third way to do it is to take what Thomas Jefferson did for the United States and divide everything into squares. The grid system, the Jeffersonian grid system, which we're very comfortable with here in the Midwest. And not so much out on the East Coast in the original 13 colonies, but certainly here in the Midwest. The whole farm to market road system is built on the Jeffersonian grid. And we're so comfortable with it, it seems natural. It's naturalized. Snyder is saying something else. He's saying, no, it's not rivers. No, it's not Jeffersonian grids. No, it's not the limits of conquest. It is the high ground, the divisions between watersheds. The water goes this way from a water divide and that way into two different watersheds. So here's a map I did for a grant project that shows the entire Mississippi-Missouri River Basin. And the project was one in rewilding, how to create a system that goes from the western United States with all its wildlands to the eastern United States, Appalachia especially, with its wildlands, and to rewild the Midwest so that we have greater biodiversity and connectedness between the two ends of the continent. And this project is ongoing, and at the moment I don't have grant funding, but I continue to talk about rewilding as a potential for the Midwest, because I think it's very important that we have natural spaces, large natural spaces, where the wildlife can thrive, where the biodiversity of things like mycorrhizal fungi that interact with our oak trees can survive. So another way of looking at those old ways of thinking in new ways is to talk as an ecologist. An ecologist focuses on relationships between things, not so much on species or objects, certain chemicals, for example. We look at relationships. Relationships are more about how healthy is a system? How intact are the relationships? What can be done to bring back the relationships of healthy soil, healthy functioning waterways? I'm going to skip over this slide. You can tell I used to teach college. There's a lot of text on it, for one thing. So we live in a world in which resource extraction is the name of the game. And building on resource extraction and the sale of those resources and their remanufacturing into things that we like, then are investments. And there's a whole group of people in our world who live only from investments. And I hope none of you are in the room today, because I am critical of that group. I think people here in Fairfield get that it's not only about investing money, but it's about working on the ground to cause good things to happen. We have to have a connection with the labor of our own hands, with producing, with living on the planet, not sitting in boardrooms or corporate offices dictating where money will go. Here's an aerial image behind the text of Fairfield showing part of Crow Creek drainage, and you can see the stark difference between the urban and the rural. Stark difference. And as badly trashed as our rural lands are, they're even worse in urban areas. We have impermeable surfaces that cause the water to run sideways when it would rather percolate down into the soil. And as a result of all these changes, all these land use changes that we humans have caused, we experience what at the bottom of the slide is the conclusion, the continual degradation of vital resources and ecosystems. How am I doing on time? 4 minutes. See, I'm not even getting 7. So I might get to part 2 here in a moment. These slides will go quickly just to demonstrate some of the damage that we've caused by living on this earth, and particularly here in Iowa. This is a section of the South Skunk River upstream from here. So this water once flowed past. The picture was taken several years ago. But this section of the Skunk River was forced to run in a straight line, mainly so that the farmers on the floodplain could run their machines in straight lines also, which is more efficient for fuel consumption and harvesting and so forth. That was the primary reason for doing that. Here's an agricultural drainage ditch. That ditch was shaped like a shallow V, and since it was dug and put in, then it's notched out a further several inches in the bottom, And if you look closely at the sides of this ag ditch, you'll see that the bank is starting to slump in some places. The water gets higher, it eats away at the bank starts to slump in, soil goes downstream. Here's a water control device with gullying above it, and this farmer, I don't know who it is, didn't document the location. This farmer dumped a bunch of concrete rubble into the gully at one time in such a way as to make the gullying worse. If you don't understand something about how water flows on the surface, you can actually make the problem worse than it is. Nutrient pollution. Here is a young person in Polk County, Iowa, sampling in one of our creeks for nitrogen, phosphorus, chloride, dissolved oxygen. It's necessary to have a certain threshold of dissolved oxygen for aquatic life, and if it goes below that threshold, not much will live in the water. Rivers as garbage dumps. This is quite a few years ago, about 10, I believe, showing a canoe party moving down the Raccoon River through part of Des Moines and picking up garbage in the river and on the sandbars. Tires, pieces of a 1939 vehicle, I forget which kind it was. It might have been a Studebaker. You can actually identify some of these things. It's not just rusty metal, but someone once owned a 1939 Studebaker in Des Moines, and somehow parts of it got into the river. June 14th, 2008, the flooding along the Des Moines River. I was in Minnesota in 1993, so I didn't get any pictures of that flood event. The flooding isn't only urban, it affects cropland too. This is in Guthrie County on a small creek where about half of the field in the foreground is underwater. Why does this happen? Because of agricultural tiling, because of stream straightening, because of impermeable surfaces, mainly in urban areas, and we create the flooding situations. So these floods are human-made floods. They are not natural disasters. They are human-made. So that takes me up to what I do for a living in part. So I practice stream hydrology and stream restoration. Stream hydrology is a scientific area of practice that involves going out and qualitatively and quantitatively measuring the features of a particular stream or section of a stream, and then figuring out how to design a repair to some portion of the stream, how to fix it, how to make things better. And in my work, I'm not an engineer, I'm an ecologist. I come at it differently from an engineer's approach. And so I think about how do you make this a more natural functioning system? Not how do we take care of the floods with concrete and gabion baskets and riprap and all that stuff. How do we make this a more natural system with all of the insects that belong there, the larvae of insects that live in the water? You know, dragonflies are really beneficial. They get up and eat mosquitoes when they're adults, right? Who can argue with a dragonfly? Well, maybe back in the Cretaceous period when they had wingspans about like this, right? Ah! So there's remote analysis, field analysis, and then data analysis. Those are the three main steps, and there will be a quiz after this. And then the design stage. So again, just some more quick photographs. One of my earlier projects was as a subcontractor to another business, and I did most of the stream hydrology work. And we came up with this bank reshape on the right-hand side. This had been a badly slumping, very flashy headwater stream, meaning that as a headwater, it's the first channelized section on the upland, going down to further channels and tributaries coming in. And so we went for about a 3-to-1 bank reslope as opposed to a 75 to 90% slope angle, 90% being vertical. We put in the stone toe armor that you see on one side and revegetated the entire bank. It will be less flashy. It will have more flood storage. The natural vegetation will hold the soil in place. And the bank armor will prevent the undercutting that led to the slumping originally. This was a farmer who committed 2 sins. One against the Clean Water Act by trying to rechannel a stream, a creek, and the other by doing most of the work on his neighbor's property. Oops. Now, the rest of the story is the neighbor happened to be a lawyer. So our job was to repair the stream at the farmer's expense, but also to try to make the legal jeopardy here a lot less and restore the landscape with tree plantings and reseeding the vegetation, as well as considering the farmer's initial concern, and that was that the creek is cutting toward this cornfield. So our solution to this was to take care of all those problems in one swell swoop, as they say, one fell swoop. And it did cost him a pretty penny, but I think at the end of it, everybody was happy. That's the ideal circumstance. There's a lot of potential in this county for fixing streams. Not just fixing them, making them healthier, making the water work the way it wants to. And that'll be my closing statement. It will be fun to do some projects down here. And there's a section of Cedar Creek that's been straightened. Questions?
You know, there's a film that Dick made, a film of the stream that got straightened, how it looked before and how it looked after. I think they restored it. It's a great piece of film. Sure.
Yeah, Cedar Creek is the name of it, yes. It's a beautiful film, not just because I'm in it, but because actually for other reasons. He caught me off guard for the interview. Hey, you want to be on camera while you're down here? I haven't shaved and I haven't had a shower for 2 days. Okay.
A little bit about what the potential is for campus, programming on campus, what kinds of things can be done.
Yeah. So here's where nature gets in the way of maybe our cultural wishes to a little extent. People don't like wetlands because they breed mosquitoes or because wetlands are against a religious tradition in this case. Or so I was told, that wetlands don't fit within a Vedic landscape. I don't know any details about that, it's just hearsay. And so there used to be a large wetland pool where Crow Creek runs through campus, and that was filled in. If you go back far enough on the aerial imagery to 1939 or so, those are the earliest statewide aerial photos we have, you can see that there's a big creek meander in Crow Creek across the campus. It would be possible to put the creek back into its channel in that same location and adjusting for the changes in the amount of water and the need for flood storage that are different now as opposed to in the 1930s. And if it were me, I'd say, you know, so what if there's some tradition that says no wetlands? put a wetland in. The wetland helps with flood storage. And if you have the right habitat in there, you will have very few mosquitoes. Very few. It won't be an appreciable problem. That means that you're producing the right kind of predatory birds and insects right nearby who will take care of those little pesky things for you. They are part of the natural landscape, but in balance. Then extending downstream and upstream, there's potential for other kinds of projects to stop some of the initial erosion upstream and to renaturalize Crow Creek as it comes around the east side of the city, working with the city engineer and the city people. And this would be a sort of, as possible, think about how this can be renaturalized as opposed to just throwing more stone into it or building concrete that will tell the stream what to do. So there's a lot of potential here in town, and that extends out to Troy Creek, the creek to the west, I've forgotten the name of it, that goes through Witham Woods. Mitchell, that's the one. And looking at the entire county, I mean, you could do work on Cedar Creek, too. There's just huge potential here.